What does it mean to come home, only to find the life you left in ruins? I'm Marisella Dayne, a soldier for 40 years, my life stitched together by discipline, duty, and the weight of my father's pocket watch in my jacket. A gift before my first deployment, his voice steady. Always come home. I did, time and again, through deserts and jungles, but this homecoming was different. The call to end my final mission overseas hit like a sniper's bullet, sharp and unexpected. One moment, I was scanning security reports in a dim operations room. The next, I was stuffing my duffel bag, the watches ticking louder than my thoughts. I was leaving the military, the only life I'd known, to return to my son, Daniel, in Naples, Florida. I hadn't told him I was coming. His smile, the way his hazel eyes crinkled when he laughed, was a secret I carried to keep me steady. But something felt off, a tightness in my chest, warning me of fractures I couldn't yet see. The overnight flight to Miami blurred with engine hum and restless dreams, the Atlantic's dawn a thin red scar outside my window. I wondered if Daniel was at work or still asleep, unaware his mother was crossing oceans to surprise him. The Florida heat slammed into me as I stepped off the plane, heavy and unyielding like a flak jacket in summer. The taxi driver tossed my duffel in the trunk without a word. Naples, I said, rattling off Daniel's address. Palm trees swayed along the highway, their fronds catching the humid breeze, but that tightness in my chest grew sharper. Daniel and I hadn't spoken much lately, my deployments, his life, but I always believed we could pick up where we left off, like soldiers after a long patrol. The cab turned onto his street, and something in me shifted, like a compass needle losing north. His lawn was overgrown, a tangle of weeds choking the grass. The mailbox bulged with envelopes, some spilling onto the ground. Curtains were drawn tight, blocking the sun. It wasn't a home, it was a place abandoned, left to rot. I climbed out, the heat biting my neck, my boots heavy on the cracked driveway. I raised my hand to knock when a voice called out. Mrs. Turner, Daniel's neighbor since he bought the place, stood across the street, clutching a watering can, her face pale as ash. Marisella, she said, hurrying over, her steps uneven. You don't know, do you? My fingers tightened around the watch, its metal cool against my palm, but my voice stayed steady, trained by years of facing unknowns. Know what? Her eyes darted away, then back. Daniel's been in the ICU for 2 weeks. Ambulance took him in the middle of the night. My pulse thudded, but I held her gaze. And Brianna? I asked, picturing Daniel's wife, her bright smile at their wedding. Mrs. Turner hesitated, glancing at the ground. She's been on a yacht in the Keys, posting pictures all over Facebook, living it up. The words landed like shrapnel, each one tearing deeper. Daniel, alone in a hospital bed. Brianna, partying while he suffered. The air thickened, pressing against my ribs. I didn't thank her. I didn't say goodbye. I turned back to the cab, the driver still waiting, and gave him the address for Naples General. The drive was a haze, the city blurring past. Strip malls, palm-lined streets, the relentless sun. My mind raced, replaying Mrs. Turner's words, trying to stitch them into something that made sense. Daniel had always been strong, a boy who'd grown into a man who could handle anything. How had I missed this? How had cancer crept in unnoticed? The hospital's glass doors loomed ahead, and I pushed through, the air sharp with disinfectant, a smell that clung like guilt. At the reception desk, I gave my name and his, my voice clipped, military precise. The nurse's eyes flickered, recognition, pity, I couldn't tell, and she pointed me to the ICU, 5th floor, room 512. The elevator ride was silent, my hand gripping the watch, its edges digging into my skin. The hallway stretched long and sterile, broken only by the mechanical beep of monitors, a rhythm I'd heard in too many field hospitals. I stepped into Daniel's room, and the world narrowed to that moment. The beeping was louder here, insistent, weaving through the tangle of tubes and wires draped over my son. He lay in the bed, his skin pale as the sheets, his frame shrunken beneath the hospital gown. His chest rose and fell, fragile, like it might stop if I looked away. A man in a white coat turned from the monitor. Dr. Julian Cross, he said, his voice low but firm. You're Marisella, Daniel's mother? I nodded, unable to speak. Advanced gastric cancer, he said. Terminal. If we'd caught it earlier, we might have had more time. He's been here 2 weeks. No visitors. The words hit like a misfired round. Unreal. Wrong. I moved closer, my fingers brushing Daniel's hand, his skin cold, veins faint under my touch. His eyelids fluttered, then opened, those hazel eyes meeting mine, the same ones that lit up on the baseball field when he was small. "I love you, Mom," he whispered, his voice thin as air. Before I could answer, the monitor's steady beep collapsed into a single, piercing wail. Nurses rushed in, their footsteps a chaotic thunder against the tile, hands flying to machines, and his chest as Dr. Cross guided me gently but firmly into the hall. I stood frozen, my back against the cool wall, the piercing tone echoing in my ears like a siren I couldn't silence. Commands flew through the door. Clear, compressions, epinephrine. The language of last resorts I'd heard too many times in field med tents, but never for my own blood. My fingers dug into the pocket watch, its ticking lost in the frenzy, as if time itself had paused to witness this unraveling. Minutes stretched into an eternity, each one pulling at the threads of hope I'd clung to since stepping off that plane. Daniel, my boy, who I'd raised through deployments and distance, who I'd pictured waiting with open arms. How had it come to this? The doctor's words replayed, advanced, terminal, no visitors. Alone. He'd been alone, and I'd been oceans away, chasing threats that paled against this one. The door opened, and Dr. Cross stepped out, his expression heavy, etched with the weight of too many such moments. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady but laced with genuine regret. "We did everything we could." The words settled like lead in my chest, final and unyielding. I nodded, because what else was there? No salute, no orders to follow, just the hollow echo of loss. He placed a hand on my shoulder briefly, a human gesture amid the clinical cold. "Take your time. We can discuss arrangements when you're ready." But I wasn't ready. I'd never be ready for this. I stepped back into the room, the monitors now silent, the nurses quietly disconnecting wires, their movements respectful, almost reverent. Daniel lay still, his face peaceful, in a way that broke me more than the struggle would have. I leaned over, pressing my lips to his forehead, his skin already cooling, and whispered the words I hadn't said enough. "I love you too, son. I'm so sorry I was late." The watch in my hand felt heavier than ever, its promise mocking me. I had come home, but too late to save what mattered most. I don't remember leaving the hospital, the paperwork a blur of signatures and condolences. The sun outside was blinding, the heat wrapping around me like an unwelcome embrace as I climbed into another taxi. The drive back to Daniel's house was silent, save for the hum of tires on asphalt, my mind a storm of memories. Him as a toddler, clinging to my uniform before I shipped out. Teenage years, letters exchanged across continents, his pride in my service masking the loneliness I now saw clearly. And Brianna, how would she fit into this? Mrs. Turner's words gnawed at me. Yacht, keys, pictures on Facebook. While Daniel fought alone, she'd been, what, celebrating? The thought ignited a spark beneath the grief, a flicker of anger that kept me from drowning. The cab pulled up to the house, the overgrown grass even more accusing in the afternoon light. I paid the driver, grabbed my duffel, and approached the door, the keys feeling foreign in my hand, like they belonged to a stranger's life. Pushing open the door, a stale wave of air hit me, thick with neglect, the kind that settles when no one's cared for weeks. The hospital's disinfectant clung to my clothes, mixing with the musty scent, turning my stomach. I dropped my bag in the entryway and moved into the living room, the curtains still drawn, casting everything in dim shadow. Empty glasses sat on the coffee table, a thin layer of dust coating their rims, remnants of forgotten evenings. I flicked on a lamp, the light harsh against the gloom, revealing more. A blanket crumpled on the couch, as if someone had slept there fitfully. Daniel's, maybe, in the nights before the ambulance came. My chest tightened further, imagining him here, in pain, reaching for the phone alone. The kitchen was worse, takeout containers stacked haphazardly in the sink, unwashed dishes crusted with old food, the refrigerator humming its lonely tune. On the counter, a pile of unopened mail leaned precariously against the wall. I tore through the envelopes, my hands steady from habit, but my heart racing. Utility shut-off warnings glared back at me, red stamps demanding attention. Overdue credit card statements followed, balances spiraling into figures that didn't match Daniel's careful nature. Late mortgage notices came last, threats of foreclosure whispering failure. He'd never been careless with money. I'd taught him better, wiring funds during lean times, advising on budgets over staticky calls. This wasn't him. This was something else. I moved to his small office, the chair slightly askew, as if abandoned mid-thought. Papers littered the desk, some crumpled, others folded neatly, a chaos that spoke of distraction. Among them, a thick stack of receipts caught my eye. The first was for a yacht rental in Key West, $150,000, dated the week Daniel entered the ICU. My breath caught. Another from a high-end jeweler in Miami, nearly $200,000 for pieces that screamed excess. Dinners at oceanfront resorts, charges from luxury clothing boutiques, all time-stamped during his hospital stay while he lay hooked to machines. The dates aligned too perfectly, a timeline of betrayal unfolding in ink. I sat down hard in the desk chair, the receipts trembling in my hands, each one a quiet accusation. Brianna's face filled my mind, the smile she'd worn in those social media posts Mrs. Turner described, carefree, indulgent. I'd trusted her to stand by my son, to be the family I couldn't always provide. Instead, she'd been draining his accounts, living lavishly while he withered alone. The anger that had flickered now burned steady, a fire forged in grief. But this was only the surface. I knew there was more buried here, waiting to be unearthed. I pressed the receipts into a neat stack, my military training kicking in, assess, plan, act. Whatever came next, I would face it head-on, for Daniel. The house felt even quieter now, the weight of discovery pressing down. I glanced at the window, the late afternoon sun filtering through cracks in the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. How many nights had Daniel sat here, feeling the illness creep in, wondering where his wife was? The thought twisted like a knife. I reached for my father's pocket watch again, winding it slowly, the familiar click grounding me. It was time to confront the ghost in those photos, to hear her voice and gauge her lies. But first, I needed to breathe. To let the grief and rage settle into something usable, like loading a magazine before a mission. The path ahead was clear, even if it led through darkness. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the walls in fading orange, I set the receipts on the coffee table, my fingers curling around my phone. Brianna's number was still saved, though I hadn't dialed it in months, our conversations always brief, polite, centered on Daniel. For a moment, I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering, the weight of what I'd uncovered pushing me forward like a command I couldn't ignore. The call connected almost instantly, and there she was, her face filling the display, framed by the blinding white of a yacht deck. Music thumped in the background, mingled with bursts of laughter and the clink of glasses. She held a stemmed drink, bright orange liquid sloshing against the rim as the boat rocked gently. Behind her, people in swimwear danced and shouted over the wind, their joy a stark contrast to the hollow ache in my chest. "Well, look who finally decided to call," she said, her smile wide, as if we were old friends catching up after a casual absence. I kept my voice flat, steady, the way I'd addressed subordinates in tense briefings. "Daniel's gone." Her smile faltered for a heartbeat, a flicker I might have missed if I weren't watching so closely. Then she shrugged, taking a slow sip, the liquid glistening on her lips. It was inevitable. He'd been sick for a while, nothing anyone could do. The casualness of it stunned me, like she'd commented on the weather, not the death of her husband. My lungs tightened, but I didn't let it show, my face a mask honed by years of control. "And the charges on his card? The yacht rentals, the jewelry?" Her laugh was short, careless, cutting through the music like a blade. "I'm his wife. What's his is mine. That's how marriage works, Marisella." The ease with which she said it was almost more shocking than the words themselves. No remorse, no hesitation, just entitlement wrapped in a smirk. I studied her face for a long second, memorizing every detail. The designer sunglasses perched on her head, the shimmer of gold hoops in her ears, the wind tangling her perfectly styled hair. She looked untouched by grief, radiant in the sun's glow. "Enjoy the view," I said quietly, my tone even, but laced with something colder. She tilted her head, as if she'd heard a compliment. "Oh, I will." I leaned forward, my face filling the screen now. "That was your last party on my dime." I ended the call before she could respond, her mid-smiker frozen on the black screen for a split second before it went dark. Setting the phone down, I reached for my father's pocket watch, the cool metal steadying me like an anchor in rough seas. The conversation had confirmed what the receipts suggested. This wasn't oversight or desperation. It was deliberate, cruel. Brianna had known about Daniel's illness, had watched him fade, and chosen indulgence over care. The anger burned hotter now, but it was focused, a tool rather than a wildfire. It was time to make sure she never touched another cent of what Daniel had left behind. By the next morning, I was on the road to Tampa, the folder of receipts buckled into the passenger seat like a silent witness, and Daniel's notarized power of attorney tucked safely in my bag. The highway stretched ahead, the miles blurring past under a cloudless sky, the steady hum of the engine matching the rhythm of my resolve. I'd woken early, the house still dark, brewing coffee in Daniel's kitchen while sorting through more papers. Anything that might strengthen my case. A few stray receipts had surfaced from under the couch cushions. Small charges for spa days and boutique wines, each one adding to the pile of evidence. I had one person in mind who could cut through the red tape without delay. Javier Ortiz, my commanding officer from years back, now retired into military financial administration, the kind of role where connections made things happen fast. We'd shared foxholes and strategy sessions. He knew me, trusted me. The drive gave me time to think, to replay the video call, Brianna's shrug echoing in my mind. How long had this been going on? Had Daniel suspected, or had he loved her too blindly to see? Pulling into the parking lot of his office building, the structure squat and unassuming amid Tampa's sprawl, I felt a familiar surge. Mission mode, objectives clear. Javier greeted me at the door, his handshake firm, his smile warm but quickly fading as he read my expression. "Marisella," he said, ushering me inside, the smell of old wood and fresh coffee wrapping around us. "I haven't seen you in years, but I can tell this isn't just a social visit." I set the folder on his desk and opened it to the first yacht receipt, the paper crisp under my fingers. These were charged to Daniel's accounts while he was in the ICU, and here's the power of attorney he signed before my last deployment. Javier flipped through the pages, his brow tightening with each one, his eyes narrowing at the totals. "You don't have to explain more. Let's get to work." For the next 40 minutes, the room filled with the tapping of keys, the shuffle of documents, and his low voice on the phone confirming cancellations and holds. I watched each step like I was tracking an operation in the field, noting the account numbers, the transfer confirmations. Finally, he slid a printout across the desk. All accounts frozen, linked cards canceled, remaining balances transferred to a holding account in my name. I exhaled slowly, the first real breath I'd taken since Daniel's hospital room, the tension easing just a fraction. "Thank you, Javier." He leaned back, his gaze steady. "Don't thank me yet. She's going to come at you hard." He was right. Before I even left the parking lot, my phone lit up with Brianna's name, the screen vibrating against the console. I let it go to voicemail, then another, and a third. The first was full of curses, her voice sharp and furious, threats spilling out like venom. By the third, her tone had shifted, softer, almost pleading. "Marisella, please, I just need access to cover some expenses. We can work this out." Not once did she mention Daniel's name, as if he were an afterthought, not the reason for all this. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the highway unfolding before me, and let the phone ring unanswered. The vibrations against my palm were a reminder. This was only the first step. The real fight was still ahead, and I was ready to meet it. Back at Daniel's house, I went straight to the study, the room smelling faintly of old paper and dust, the blinds half closed against the afternoon sun, casting striped shadows across the floor. The drive from Tampa had been a tense one. Brianna's voicemails playing on loop in my mind, her pleas turning to demands, each one fueling the fire inside me. I set my bag down and surveyed the desk, cluttered but organized in Daniel's way. Neat stacks of documents, a few opened envelopes, pens lined up in a coffee mug like soldiers at attention. I started with the top drawer, sifting through folders of insurance papers and tax forms, my fingers moving methodically, searching for anything that might reveal more about how deep this betrayal ran. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of user manuals for appliances long since replaced, I found it, a small leather-bound notebook, the kind Daniel had always used for jotting reminders, its cover worn at the edges, the spine creased from constant handling. I sat at his desk, the chair creaking under me, and opened the notebook, the pages filled with his careful handwriting, a script I'd recognize anywhere. Precise, like mine, but softer around the edges. The first few pages were mundane, lists of household chores, grocery items, appointments scribbled in the margins. But as I flipped further, the entries shifted, each line carrying a date, an amount, and a short note. March 8th, $3,000 for Brianna's medicine. April 12th, $5,500 for roof repairs. May 3rd, $7,000 for car payment. Page after page, the amounts grew larger, each justified in his words, all tied to Brianna's needs or the house's upkeep. My stomach tightened as I read, a knot forming that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the pattern emerging. Daniel had been meticulous, but this felt off. Too many emergencies. Too much outflow without explanation. I reached for my bag and pulled out the bank statements I'd collected from the mail pile earlier, spreading them across the desk like a map of deception. Cross-checking was instinctive, years of reviewing intel reports making it second nature. The March 8th medicine matched a charge for a high-end spa in Palm Beach, the receipt buried in the stack I'd brought from the living room. The roof repairs lined up exactly with a payment to a luxury boutique in Miami, itemized for dresses and accessories. The car payment was the precise amount for a down payment on a designer watch from a store in South Beach. One by one, the entries aligned not with necessities, but with extravagance, Daniel's justifications a cover for Brianna's spending. I leaned back, gripping the notebook as though it might burn my hands, the leather warm from my touch. How had he not seen it? Or had he, and chosen to believe her lies because the alternative was too painful? The thought stung, imagining him here, alone, writing these notes while the cancer ate away at him, trusting her completely as she fed her vanity with his savings. Needing more, I picked up Daniel's phone from the evidence bag the hospital had given me. Its screen cracked slightly, as if from a fall. Most of the messages were deleted, the inbox sparse, but in an archived folder labeled Old Chats, I found threads that made my blood run cold. Scrolling through, I paused at one from Brianna to a friend, time-stamped just weeks before his admission. Might as well enjoy his money. He won't last long. The words stared back at me, casual, heartless, as if discussing a sale rather than a dying man. I read it again, then again, the screen blurring for a moment before I blinked it clear. There were more, snippets of plans for trips, shopping sprees, all while Daniel's texts to her went unanswered or dismissed with excuses. Feeling tired, love you, he'd written one night. Her reply, hours later, out with friends, talk tomorrow. But tomorrow had turned into weeks of silence, broken only by charges on his card. I closed the phone slowly, my hand trembling not from shock now, but from a steady, simmering resolve that built like pressure in a chamber. This wasn't just theft. It was cruelty, documented in her own words, a deliberate stripping away of dignity in his final days. The notebook and phone lay side by side on the desk, evidence that went beyond finances to the core of betrayal. I thought of Daniel's pale face in the hospital, his whispered words, and how Brianna had shrugged it off like an inconvenience. No more. I would make sure the world saw this, that justice wasn't just freezing accounts, but exposing the truth, raw and undeniable. The sun had shifted, the shadows lengthening, but I sat there longer, planning my next moves. Contacts to call, documents to copy, a case to build that would leave no room for her smiles or shrugs. The house creaked around me, settling into evening, but the quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt charged, ready for the battle ahead. My father's watch ticked softly in my pocket, a reminder that time was on my side now, and I intended to use every second. The days following blurred into a rhythm of preparation, the notebook and phone becoming the core of my arsenal, photocopied and organized into binders that I carried like classified intel. I contacted Armando Ruiz, a lawyer I'd known through military circles, sharp and unrelenting, the kind who saw cases as battles to be won. We met in a small cafe near the courthouse, the air thick with espresso and the murmur of morning commuters. He reviewed the evidence over steaming cups, his eyes lighting up at the messages, the falsified entries. "This is solid," he said, tapping the notebook. "Not just financial misuse, but intent. We can argue abandonment, even negligence." I nodded, my mind already mapping the strategy, adding details from Dr. Cross. I'd called him, securing a recorded testimony about how earlier intervention might have extended Daniel's life by 1 to 2 years. Armando suggested we include witness statements. I reached out to Mrs. Turner, who agreed to describe the abandoned house and Brianna's absence. Each piece locked into place, building a case that felt airtight, unassailable. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep, the house whispering memories as I paced the living room. Flipping through the binders under the lamp's glow. Daniel's photo on the mantel caught the light, his smile a reminder of what was at stake. Not just money, but justice for the trust he'd misplaced. I wound my father's watch, its tick a steady companion, and thought of the deployments where I'd faced uncertainty with less fear than this. Court wasn't a battlefield I knew, but the principles were the same: preparation, evidence, resolve. By morning I was ready, dressed in a simple black suit, the power of attorney and evidence folder tucked under my arm as I drove to the courthouse. The building rose stark against the Florida sky, its columns imposing, the steps worn from countless feet seeking resolution. Inside, the air was cool, almost chilly. High ceilings amplifying every shuffle of paper and murmur of voices, a far cry from the humid chaos outside. Armando waited at the petitioner's table, his files neatly stacked, his expression steady as a sniper's aim. I took my seat beside him, the wooden chair hard against my back, and scanned the room. Across the aisle, Brianna adjusted her designer blazer, whispering to her attorney, a man in a slick gray suit who exuded confidence like cheap cologne. She caught my eye, her gaze sharp, but I held it without flinching, letting the weight of what I knew show in my stare. The judge entered, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair and glasses perched on her nose, calling the session to order, with a rap of the gavel that echoed like a starting gun. Armando rose first, his voice clear and measured, laying out the timeline. Daniel's illness, his ICU admission, the complete absence of visitors, particularly his wife. He moved to the evidence, projecting the receipts onto a large screen behind him. The yacht rental, the jewelry purchases, dates glaring in bold. Gasps rippled through the sparse gallery, but I kept my focus forward. Then came the bank statements, cross-referenced with Daniel's notebook, Armando highlighting the discrepancies. What was logged as medicine was a spa retreat. Roof repairs funded couture. This wasn't shared marital spending, it was systematic drainage while Mr. Dayne lay dying. He played the archived message next, Brianna's words appearing in stark black and white. Might as well enjoy his money, he won't last long. The courtroom hushed, the air thick with judgment. Armando didn't pause, cueing Dr. Cross's recorded testimony, his voice firm through the speakers. With timely care and support, Daniel might have lived another 1 to 2 years. Isolation and stress can accelerate decline in such cases. I glanced at Brianna. Her face had paled, her hands twisting in her lap. Her lawyer stood next, his tone smooth but brittle, arguing spousal rights and marital property, claiming my actions were vindictive, an attempt to punish a grieving widow. Mrs. Cole was coping in her own way, he said, but the words rang hollow, oil on water, sliding off without sticking. The judge leaned forward, her gaze piercing as she reviewed the documents spread across the bench. Given the clear documentation of financial misuse, she said, her voice even, the abandonment of the decedent during his critical illness, and the credible medical testimony presented, the court orders all assets of Daniel Dayne frozen. Temporary control of the estate is granted to Marisella Dayne. Brianna Cole is prohibited from accessing any property or funds until further order. The gavel's sharp crack sealed it, final and resounding. Brianna shot to her feet, her face flushed crimson, eyes blazing. "You'll regret this, Marisella. You can't do this to me." 2 bailiffs moved in, their presence calm but firm, guiding her toward the exit as she hurled a final glare over her shoulder, her heels clicking angrily on the tile. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap, the verdict settling over me like a weight finally lifted, though the ache in my chest remained. Armando patted my arm. "Well done," he murmured. "This is a win." But as I gathered the papers, I knew it was more than that. It was accountability, a step toward closing the wound Brianna had inflicted. Outside, the sun beat down, the heat familiar now, almost comforting as I walked to my car, the folder lighter in my hands. The fight had cost me, but for Daniel, it was worth every moment. The house felt hollow in the days after the court ruling, its quiet pressing in on me like an empty barracks after a unit ships out. I spent my mornings at the kitchen table, sorting through the estate paperwork under the soft light filtering through the window. The stack of documents, a tangible reminder of Daniel's life, reduced to balances and statements. The money wasn't just numbers. It was years of his work, sacrifices made in quiet hours, now mine to steward. One evening, as the sun cast long streaks of gold across the countertop, casting shadows that danced like memories, I knew I couldn't let it sit untouched, gathering dust in accounts. It needed purpose, a way to honor Daniel beyond the courtroom's cold justice. I called a contact at the local hospital, an administrator I'd met during my visits, and began outlining the idea for a nonprofit in his name. The Daniel Fund would provide financial support for cancer patients abandoned by family or left without resources, covering treatments, bills, even companionship in those lonely hours. The paperwork moved faster than I expected, Javier pulling strings from his end to expedite approvals, his voice on the phone reassuring, "This is good, Marisella." Healing through action. Within weeks, the first transfers were in place, funds allocated from the frozen assets, each dollar a step away from Brianna's grasp and towards something meaningful. I visited the hospital regularly during setup, walking those sterile halls with a different stride, not as a grieving mother, but as someone building a legacy. On my first official visit as the fund's founder, the nurse led me to a quiet wing, the air humming with the soft beeps of monitors and the murmur of voices. There, in a room bathed in afternoon light, I met Gabriel. He was 8 years old, his frame small under the thin hospital blanket, his head covered by a faded baseball cap pulled low. Leukemia, the nurse explained in a low tone, no relatives able to care for him. Parents gone, extended family scattered or unwilling. He sat up as I approached, his eyes meeting mine, clear but tired in a way no child should know, shadows under them speaking of nights alone. I pulled a chair to his bedside, introducing myself quietly, my voice softer than usual, stripped of the command tone. "I'm Marisella. I knew someone who fought like you are." He nodded, fiddling with the edge of his blanket, his small fingers tracing patterns. "I just want someone to stay," he said, his voice so soft I almost missed it, the words landing deep, stirring the grief I'd buried under resolve. It echoed Daniel's isolation, the abandonment that had cut so deep. I reached for his hand, holding it gently, feeling the warmth of life pulsing there. "I'm here now," I told him, meaning it more than I realized. That afternoon, I spoke with his doctor in the hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, arranging support through the fund, covering treatments, therapies, even small comforts like new books or toys. The doctor nodded appreciatively, his clipboard tucked under his arm. This could make a real difference for him. I left with a folder of medical notes and Gabriel's small voice echoing in my mind, knowing this was more than charity. It was a bridge from loss to something new, a chance to nurture where I'd failed before. Back home, the house seemed less empty that night, the idea of Gabriel lingering like a promise. I cooked a simple meal, the sizzle of vegetables in the pan filling the kitchen, and thought of how the fund might grow. Perhaps partnerships with other hospitals, awareness events to draw donors. But Gabriel stayed at the forefront, his tired eyes a call to action. Over the next days, I returned to the hospital often, bringing puzzles and stories, sitting by his bed as he shared bits of his world, favorite superheroes, dreams of playing baseball once he was strong enough. His laughter, rare at first, began to come easier, lightening the room. One visit, he showed me a drawing he'd made, a house by the sea, stick figures holding hands, and I felt a pull, deeper than sympathy. "That's a good home," I said, tracing the lines. He looked up. "Wish I had one like that." The words hung there, unspoken possibilities swirling. I consulted with social workers, the fund's resources opening doors, and started the process for temporary guardianship. Papers signed with a steady hand, but a racing heart. When the approval came, faster than anticipated thanks to the doctor's advocacy, I prepared the spare room, dusting surfaces and adding fresh linens. A small act of hope. Picking Gabriel up from the hospital felt surreal, his backpack slung over his shoulder, the nurse waving goodbye with a smile. He was quiet in the car, staring out at the passing palms, but as we pulled into the driveway he turned to me. "Is this staying?" I nodded, helping him out. "As long as you want." Inside, he explored slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, as if testing reality. That first night, I tucked him in, the room smelling of clean sheets, and watched him drift off. His breathing even. The house breathed with him. The hollow spaces filling, not replacing Daniel, but weaving alongside his memory. My father's watch on the nightstand ticked softly, marking time's gentle turn toward healing. When Gabriel moved into the house, the stillness that had lingered since Daniel's passing shifted, his laughter seeming to find its way into every corner, lightening the air in a way I hadn't thought possible again. The first days were tentative, him exploring the spaces with wide eyes, touching the furniture as if to confirm it was real, while I watched from the doorway, my heart a mix of joy and ache. We started small, unpacking his few belongings. A backpack of clothes, some books from the hospital, a stuffed bear worn from hugs. I showed him the backyard, the patch of earth where Daniel and I had once planted flowers, now overgrown but full of potential. "We can make it ours," I said, kneeling beside him in the dirt. He nodded, his small hands eager as we turned over the soil, the scent of fresh earth rising around us, grounding and alive. We planted tomatoes, basil, and marigolds, seeds pressed into rows with careful fingers, his grin breaking through when a worm wriggled free. "It's like treasure," he said, holding it up, and I laughed, the sound surprising me, echoing off the fence. The first weekend, we repainted the spare room together, transforming the plain walls into something vibrant. He picked a bright blue from the samples at the store, saying it reminded him of the sky on a clear day, endless and free. I taped the edges while he rolled the paintbrush clumsily along the walls, leaving streaks and uneven patches that I didn't bother to fix, imperfections that made it his. Paint splattered on our clothes, blue dots on his nose, and we ended up sitting on the drop cloth, sharing stories amid the fumes. He talked about the hospital, the other kids, the nights when the beeps kept him awake, his voice matter-of-fact but edged with shadows. I shared bits of my military days, the stars over foreign skies, the watch my father gave me, winding it to show him the mechanism inside. "It means always come home," I explained, and he touched it gently, his eyes thoughtful. "Like here?" "Yes, like here." That room became a sanctuary, his mark on the house as clear as the color on the walls. Evenings became our time, a routine that settled like a gentle rhythm, pushing back the quiet that had once overwhelmed me. Gabriel would perch on a stool at the counter while I cooked, sometimes chopping vegetables with careful concentration, his knife skills improving with each meal. We tried new recipes, experimenting with spices I'd brought back from deployments, his favorites quickly becoming mine. Pasta with fresh basil from our garden, the sauce simmering as we talked. One night, as we stirred together, I caught him humming softly, a tune Daniel used to whistle when he was happy, simple and uplifting. It stopped me short, the spoon paused mid-stir, a comfort and an ache all at once. "Where'd you learn that?" I asked, and he shrugged. "Just came to me." The way Gabriel's presence filled the spaces Daniel had once occupied, without erasing them, felt like threads weaving together, past and present, intertwining in quiet companionship. After dinner, we'd sit on the porch, watching the sun dip, fireflies flickering in the dusk, him leaning against my shoulder, the warmth of him a balm. I tucked him in each night, the blue walls glowing softly in the lamplight, pulling the covers up as he yawned, his baseball cap on the nightstand. "Story?" he'd ask, and I'd recount tales from my life, softened for his ears, adventures in far places, lessons in resilience. As he drifted off, I'd sit a moment longer, watching his chest rise and fall, the peace on his face mirroring what was slowly building in me. The Daniel Fund grew alongside this, more patients supported, calls from the hospital about successes, but Gabriel was the heart of it, a living testament to what healing could look like. There were challenges, doctor visits, his energy waning some days, but we faced them together, my military precision applied to schedules, his spirit lifting us through. Mrs. Turner stopped by with cookies, her eyes softening at the sight of us gardening, the house alive again. "You're doing good here," she said, and I believed her. With each day, it became clearer what I had to do next, a final act to bridge the old with the new, to honor Daniel while embracing this unexpected family. The grief hadn't vanished, but it had softened, making room for joy, for love in new shapes. My father's watch, now on the dresser, ticked onward, a reminder that home wasn't just a place, but people, connections forged in the wake of loss. As Gabriel's laughter rang through the halls, I felt the weight lift further, ready for the step that would seal this chapter. The sun was just beginning to lower when Gabriel and I walked down to the shoreline. The sound of the Gulf rolling in, steady and calm, waves lapping at the sand like a heartbeat. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of salt and seagrass, a breeze tugging at our clothes as we made our way barefoot, the grains shifting under our toes. In my hands, I carried a small wooden frame with Daniel's photo inside, one from years ago when his smile could outshine any day, captured mid-laugh at a family barbecue. Gabriel held a smooth stone he'd found in the garden that morning, polished by time, saying it would keep the picture from blowing away, his logic simple and pure. We found a spot where the tide reached far enough to kiss the sand, but not take what was placed there, a natural alcove sheltered by dunes. I set the frame down gently, pressing the base into the soft earth, the wood warm from my grip. Gabriel laid the stone beside it, his small fingers brushing the edge of the photo, lingering for a moment as if saying hello. We stood there for a long while, side by side, letting the waves speak for us, their rhythm a soothing murmur that washed over the day's quiet thoughts. The horizon stretched endless, the water a deep blue fading to gold as the sun dipped lower. I thought about how different this moment was from the one I'd imagined when I first boarded that flight home. Rushed, fractured, full of unspoken regrets. Loss had carved paths I hadn't seen coming, leading me through betrayal's sharp edges to this, a place of gentle release. Gabriel slipped his hand into mine, his grip steady and warm, a quiet promise that we were building something neither of us would have to leave behind. "He looks happy," Gabriel said, nodding at the photo, and I squeezed his hand. "He was, and he'd like you." The words came easy, true in a way that bridged the gaps. As the sky bloomed with streaks of pink and gold, we turned toward home, the house waiting up the path, its lights flickering on in the dusk like a beacon. That evening, back in the kitchen, the memorial lingered in our minds as we prepared dinner, the routine now infused with a deeper peace. Gabriel chopped herbs from our garden, the basil fragrant under the knife, while I stirred the pot, the steam rising warm and inviting. We talked about the beach, about memories like stones smoothed by water, and he shared a story from the hospital, a friend who'd loved the sea but never seen it. "We can go back," I said, and his eyes lit up. Nights like these had become our anchor, the house no longer hollow but alive with shared moments, the blue room upstairs a testament to new beginnings, the garden yielding its first tomatoes, red and ripe. The Daniel Fund thrived too. More families reached, stories of support filtering back like echoes of Daniel's kindness. Gabriel's health improved steadily, checkups bringing good news, his energy a constant reminder of resilience. In the weeks that followed, we explored more. Drives along the coast, picnics under palms, his laughter mingling with the wind. I showed him old photos of Daniel, tales of his childhood woven into ours. The past not a shadow but a foundation. One afternoon, as we sat in the backyard, marigolds blooming bright, he asked about my deployments, the watch I always carried. I let him hold it, explaining its promise, and he listened, then said, "You're home now." Yes, I was. Fully, in a way the military had never allowed. Brianna's threats had faded to silence, the court's ruling holding firm, assets secured for the fund's growth. Justice had been served, but this life with Gabriel, was the true victory. Love reshaping itself without losing its core. Turning toward home that day from the beach, I knew the house we returned to was more than walls and windows now. It was a place held together by love, threads of loss and gain intertwined, strong and enduring. For the first time in a long time, that was enough. As the days stretched into months, the rhythm of our lives softened, like waves gently reshaping the shore. Gabriel grew stronger, his cheeks filling with color from garden-fresh meals and sunlit adventures, his laughter a melody that danced through the rooms, easing the echoes of what once was. The Daniel Fund blossomed quietly, touching lives in ways that felt like whispers from my son. Small grants for treatments, companions for the lonely, each act a ripple extending his legacy into the world. I found myself winding my father's watch less out of habit and more with gratitude, its steady tick a companion to the peaceful evenings we shared, stories unfolding under the porch light as stars emerged overhead. Gabriel and I built traditions, simple and profound. weekly beach walks where we'd add pebbles to Daniel's memorial, watching the tide carry our thoughts seaward. Baking cookies from old recipes, flour dusting our hands as we remembered those no longer with us. The house, once a vessel of grief, became a haven of warmth, its walls absorbing our joy, the blue room a canvas of his dreams, posters of baseball heroes, drawings of our garden. Challenges came, as they do, a doctor's visit with uncertain news, a night when memories flooded back, but we faced them hand in hand, his small strength bolstering mine, teaching me that healing isn't erasure, but integration, love's quiet persistence. In the quiet moments, as he slept and the Gulf breeze stirred the curtains, I'd sit with Daniel's photo, tracing his smile, feeling the fullness of this new chapter. Loss had led me here, to a boy who needed staying, and in staying, I'd found my way home. The watch's final tick faded into silence one evening, but its promise lingered, eternal. And so we continued, two souls bound by circumstance, whispering into the future with hope's gentle breath.